The Chargers officially unveiled their plan for a new stadium/convention center expansion downtown, but there are problems. Buildings in Balboa Park are in dire need of repair, yet the park's largest tenant, the zoo, is flush with cash and not much into sharing. And the legislature passed an increase in the state minimum wage in record time. San Diego voters will still weigh in on a city measure. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Roger Scholey, Growth and Development Reporter with the San Diego Union-Tribune. Hi, Roger.
Hey, Mark.
Good to have you back again. Reporter Lisa Halverstadt, a voice of San Diego. Hi, Lisa.
Good to be here, Mark.
It's good to have you here. And Chris Genuine, editor and publisher of the Times of San Diego. Hi, Chris.
Hi, great to be here.
Glad to have you back. Well, the Chargers face more than a few hurdles if they're going to get a stadium and convention center expansion built downtown. Even if voters agree and all goes well, it would be 8 years or more even before the team would actually play a game in the new facility. Roger, let's start with this plan. It was made official, it was leaked the week before, but it's all been made official. I guess they're going to have to publish this massive thing in the UT and get the thing out there before voters.
Well, as you say, the road is a long one and it would take a lot of convincing to get voters to approve this plan for November. They're issuing their initiative in the newspaper, 13 pages of very small type you'll read to get all the details. And as we're starting to look at the initiative, it's full of questions because there's a lot of details that aren't in there, and who's going to run it, who's going to pay for it, all that sort of thing is left in legal gobbledygook.
Okay, but it is this, as we said at the open, we were talking about this on previous show. This is a convadium. Scott Lewis is
Scott loves this.
Let's give Scott credit at voice, and that is a convention stadium, and the whole thing is 1.8 billion.
Right. And
who's going to pay for all this? The taxpayers? No.
Well, the taxpayers who stay at hotels will pay for it.
Okay, the tourists.
They're going to add 4 cents to the current hotel tax, and it covers citywide. The old version of this was just sort of a tiered approach. This time it's all city hotels will pay 16.5% or charge their guests that amount of money, and that's going to cover about $1 billion for the stadium and $600 million for the convention center annex. I don't like to call it a convadium, and $200 million for the removal of the MTS bus yard, which is in the way of this project.
And we're going to get to those details on that in your story this week. And then the Chargers and the NFL kick in several hundred million.
So the Chargers will kick in $350 million, although that's assumed to be coming from seat guarantees and naming rights and other
things that haven't been sold yet.
Right.
Yeah.
So we don't know how much the Chargers, the team, will contribute to this. That's a question. And then the NFL is kicking in $300 million. 200 of that is a grant, and 100 million is a loan.
Okay, a huge amount of money. We do have a bite here. This is Fred Maas, the Chargers development consultant. Here's what he said about what the public should understand how the stadium and convention annex are going to be funded.
There'll be a lot of misinformation out there, but this is a visitor-based tax. So if you live in the city of San Diego and you don't stay in a hotel, you won't pay one dime for this facility. It will be all visitor-based. It's about 4 cents over and above what the existing transit occupancy tax is, and it's really designed for tourists and visitors to participate in building this incredible new facility downtown.
All right, well, that in itself begs a lot of questions here. If I'm planning a big convention, I've got a lot of money to spend to come to San Diego. I can look at a lot of cities. Maybe, geez, I'm going to go there, and my folks are going to pay for this stadium that they have there. And I don't know, how does this figure into us as a tourist city and an attractive convention city?
Well, on the one hand, it will be one of the highest hotel taxes in the country. But on the other hand, nobody knows about the tax until you get to check out at the end of your stay. Say, oh, I owe another $20 for hotel tax. Oh well. Yeah. So for most people, it's just another increase, and the hotels are expensive here to begin with. So what's another $20? I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, Money Magazine in its April issue says that San Diego is one of the great bargain cities for hotel stays.
Really?
So maybe there's
Maybe there's room there.
Maybe there's room for the out-of-towners to pay. But wasn't the reaction to this pretty lukewarm on the part of, at best, on the part of city officials?
Right. I'm glad you segued into that because Lisa did a story on that.
Yeah,
What'd you
so
learn?
my colleague Andrew Keats and I spent the day the other day when this came out just asking politicians and candidates what they think of this. And really they universally either panned it or said, we're not ready to tell you what we think of this. We want to look at the details. So that tells me that this is going to have some trouble at the polls because a lot of these candidates, of course, have a real interest in being out there polling. They're knocking on doors, asking a lot of San Diegans, would you pay for something like this? And the folks that are knocking on doors say that they're hearing, we are not interested.
Well, let's start with the big dog. What's Mayor Kevin Faulconer have to say about it? He's definite on it, isn't he?
Oh,
He's on vacation.
Yes, Mayor Kevin Faulconer would like to take a closer look at this.
Yeah, I
and
think you
keep a
can
lot of
divine that
things
from
in
that
mind.
statement because you really need to read it between the lines there.
But what I found interesting is that some of his more political allies and people who actually share some of the same consultants, namely Ray Ellis, who's running for District 1 City Council, came out and just tore this thing apart. And I have to think, they're working with a lot of the same people. So if, the mayor wouldn't be quite so interested in having Ray Ellis come out and fight this if they weren't kind of maybe coordinating.
Chris Cade was also very negative about it.
Council member, right?
Councilmember Chris Cade, who was Mayor Faulconer's political advisor for a long period of time.
And Scott Sherman, another council member, came out very lukewarm.
Another Republican. We should say Mayor Faulconer spent a lot of time and effort and some money on a whole other site there, the original one there in Mission Valley, the Qualcomm site, and I guess that just falls by the wayside if the Chargers
$2 million
make the play.
Well,
environmental
we shouldn't bury this yet because they have yet to raise or collect, 70,000 signatures or something from city voters over the next several months at $5 a piece. I guess it'll have to cost because initiative campaigns are getting to be that expensive.
It's a good field to work in right now, signature gathering.
Not to mention a campaign itself, plus the Chargers playing in the fall. Maybe they'll do fabulous. They'll be on the way to the Super Bowl in November just as we're going to the ballot. Just as Petco.
And maybe Trump will be elected president.
That sure did help the Padres, right?
It did.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should kill it yet. On the other hand, 2/3 vote, if that's required, will be very hard to get. The Petco did not get. They got 59%.
And that's unclear now. You had a spot survey said 54% favorite this morning, but that was a quick turnaround. Who knows how accurate that is? Let's ask about this hurdle you wrote about this week, this MTS yard, the big plot of land that this new stadium convention annex would go on to.
Yeah, well, let's remember that the site for both this convadium is 15 acres east of Petco Park. The western side is called Tailgate Park, where we all tailgate before Padres games, and the east side is the MTS bus yard, which has been there since 1922 or something. MTS is a separate entity. They can't just give this to the charge of the city. They have to sell it at fair market value or lease it or something. And they say they wouldn't. They can see why pressures are rising for that property to be used for something else, which is okay, but it will take some time to move it because they need another 10 acres or so for the bus yard.
Yeah, where are they going to find that? Who wants to have a bus yard, 10-acre bus yard next to them anywhere? And it says that your story said, well, it's got to be kind of centrally located.
I mean, they say that, but it can be anywhere.
I guess it could be.
I mean, that's just.
They are buses. They do drive on the streets.
My colleague Andrew Keats had written about this too, and kind of mentioned that there were a few sites that were floated, including one in Balboa Park.
Yeah, well, that's another.
But it's going to take a
whole other.
We'll get to that.
It's going to take a long while, though, to negotiate that whole deal. That's why it's 7 or 8 years before they'd even be playing games.
I don't think so, because Fred Moss, guy you mentioned before, says if the voters approve this, there'll be this big groundswell to get things rolling, so MTS, everyone will roll over and make it happen. But if they don't, or if it takes a long time, the latest thinking is they may not actually start construction until 2020 or 2022, opening in 2025. That's almost 10 years from now.
But they needed this right now.
They need this right now.
But now, Moss has a background in development. He was head of Civic San Diego, what is now Civic San Diego. So maybe he's got the experience to move this rapidly.
One thing before we leave, and we've got a couple seconds left, backers of East Village Innovation Center, in other words, there's other people who are eyeing this spot down there, say, they have objected to this thing. They say there's better uses here, or higher uses.
So this is called East Village People, headed by Rob Quigley and Mike Stepner, the former city planner.
KPBS this week with it.
Yeah, and so they have an alternate plan, and they've had one workshop, they have another one this weekend, to go over a idea for a high-tech employment center surrounding a park with residential and so on.
All right, and I think we will get into some more of those details as we move along in this campaign. But the point is, there could be other forces with alternatives against this campaign.
If the charges are having problems and people don't go for it, there is this alternate vision out there. Not to mention Qualcomm itself.
All right. Well, let's move on to a little bit up the street here toward Balboa Park. We're going to shift gears now. As facilities in Balboa Park crumble with no money for repairs, the park's biggest tenant finds its coffers flush. The leaders of the nonprofit San Diego Zoo are quiet as a leopard stalking prey when it comes to the question of sharing the wealth, however. Lisa, let's start with the problems in Balboa Park overall. How bad is it? How much money is it going to take? What's going on there?
Well, there are literally buildings that are falling apart. And there are a lot of things that, if you walk down the Prado that you can see, where there's maybe some rot or other things on buildings. But there are a lot of things that we can't see, plumbing issues, all sorts of things. And the best estimates are that it would cost probably at least $300 million for all the fixes in the park. And that doesn't even mention a lot of the things that people have wanted to do over the years in the park that just aren't funded.
Okay, well, I mean, that's a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Not in the general budget. We've talked many times in the show about all the other structural problems in San Diego, the infrastructure problems. So let's talk about the zoo itself, though. It's this kind of oasis, as you said in your story, with lots of money right in the middle of the park. Yeah,
so the zoo actually gets a property tax from citizens in San Diego, people who, homes in San Diego. And there's some interesting history with this. So it actually goes back all the way to 1934. At that time, the zoo was really struggling to remain open.
Middle of the Depression.
Middle of the Depression. And it was just before the Panama-California Exposition. And so they managed to get an item on the ballot. And it was a really colorful campaign, too. They even had cakes and cookies and things for kids to try to encourage them. But they got this measure on the ballot.
And it was very popular.
And it was very popular.
Support,
and this item now, this property tax, is now bringing in more than $10 million a year.
And it's not something the council can just go in and change next week, right?
This is
baked right into the charter.
It's baked into the city charter, and there are a number of different nuances. Not only is this in the charter, but also Prop 13, which passed in 1978, put a limit on property taxes. So that kind of adds this other wrinkle too if this were to go on the ballot again.
All right, so you've got this tax money, 10 to 12 million bucks now, plus you've got everything else the zoo takes in, memberships and donations, grants, etc. How well are they doing here?
Very well, exceedingly well. Since 1934, not only has the zoo become world famous, they've also gotten on the stage for their conservation efforts, and they have now one of the largest groups, they say, of members in the world. So they have about 250,000 or more member households. But then let's talk about the financials here. So their revenue that they reported for 2014 was almost $295 million. But the money that they received, if you look at revenue less expenses.
Yeah, how much are they in the black?
Nearly $69 million. So they're doing very well.
Doing really well here.
Yes.
Now, well, all right. The question is, why can't we take some of that tax money or some of that dough and spread it around the park? Help your neighbor out here.
Well, there have been some proposals to do that, and quite frankly, those have fallen flat.
I see. So what's the zoo's response when these folks come up and say, hey, we're dying over here, the buildings are crumbling, we're hitting tourists in the head with stuff?
So recently, back in December, there was a discussion about the city charter. There's an effort underway to put some items on the ballot to amend the charter. And City Councilman Mark Kersey and City Councilwoman Marty Emerald, on opposite sides of the aisle, brought up this idea that wouldn't it be neat if we could get the zoo to partner with us somehow on a Balboa Park bond? That would be interesting. Let's work on a plan. And they actually made a motion for the mayor and the budget analyst in the city to take a look at could we come up with a plan.
Oh, what did they find?
And it's, again, that one's fallen flat too. And I did contact the zoo to ask them about this. Would they be interested in a Balboa Park bond? How do they spend this tax money? What do they think about their leadership role in the park given all this success that they've had? And they told me we're really not interested in answering any of these questions.
Well, and Roger, even the council member Todd Gloria in that district says,
Yeah.
yeah, that's fine. Let's just leave it as it
Let's be
is.
fair to the zoo in one sense.
All right.
Lately, they built a parking garage for their
Definitely, yeah, this is a good
employees of
point.
like $20 million, and they improved the Gold Globe Way, so it's a lot nicer to walk.
And the Centennial Parkway.
And the
Yeah.
Centennial Parkway connecting the Prado
It is.
to the zoo.
They did a good job.
So, but I was going to say that about a decade ago, they had this idea of a giant promenade connecting the
Parking
zoo
garage.
to Elkhart and an underground parking garage. They said, oh, we have no money to pay for it. It's going to cost $200 million. We'll get the city to pay for it. Well, I'm glad that you brought up this $10 million, because that would generate around, I don't know, $100 million worth of bond money for that great big unrealized project.
when you leverage that.
So, I mean, there's plenty that you could justify would be zoo benefit that they could finance through their money that they get from the
Well,
city.
that's complicated too, because the charter item says that the money must be spent on zoological exhibits within Balboa
But
Park.
but not just exhibits, but
But they
there's
could-
facilities.
yes,
So you
or
could count
facilities.
parking as a facility. So
Potentially.
honestly,
There's
right.
debate over this.
Well, all right, Chris, you get readers' comments. You gauge the public here. If we get into a fight with the zoo and say, hey, we're a beloved zoo, you got to share some of your funds here.
I think San Diego would side with the zoo. The zoo is really one of a handful of world-class institutions here in San Diego. When you say San Diego, everybody knows the zoo, and they don't know a lot of our other very fine cultural institutions. So why take from something that's extremely successful? Why not find another avenue? And I think that's the way that San Diego voters would line up on it.
I think one thing that bothers San Diego, including me, is that the zoo markets itself as the San Diego Zoo near Balboa Park, when actually it is in Balboa Park.
It's a tenant. It's
the
the
biggest
biggest
user in
tenant.
Balboa Park, and the city and the tourist industry and everybody. You look at signs that says Balboa Park, San Diego Zoo, and you wouldn't know unless you're from here that it's part of the park. And so maybe the zoo just has to be a bit nicer to its neighbors and become part of this big family.
All right, last question before we leave this topic. Todd Gloria, as we mentioned, is termed out, and he's going to be, there's some folks obviously vying for his seat. Who are the candidates, and briefly, what are they saying about this whole
Well,
share of the wealth?
I'm not following the, I mean, do you know who they are?
Yeah,
But
so
go
they're
ahead.
Chris Ward and Anthony Bernal, two Democrats, are the front runners for this race. And actually, both of them say that Balboa Park does need a dedicated funding engine, which it does not have right now. Chris Ward believes that that it would be best to put together a group of stakeholders. There are many in Balboa Park to talk about, what could be the funding engines for the park. Anthony Bernal, who actually works for Todd Gloria, he advocates for a bond. He thinks that that's the most sustainable way to support all these big needs that the park has.
All right. Well, we'll watch and see what happens as we go along, and may wear a hard hat when I walk around Balboa Park. Okay, Governor Jerry Brown blinked in his tussle with labor leaders, and a deal was struck to raise the statewide minimum wage to $10.50 an hour next year to $15 an hour within 5 years. The agreement averted a November ballot fight and puts California out front in a national push to increase incomes, though just as we came on the air, I learned New York has done the same thing now today. So, Chris, start with the nuts and bolts of this deal here. What's the deal between the governor and labor?
So what the governor was taking into account is there are two ballot measures which would raise the minimum wage. Both of those will probably be withdrawn, but at this point, the state is poised to raise the minimum wage from the current $10 to $10.50 in January, $11 January 2018, and then go up by $1 a year until 2022 when it's $15. Small businesses have a little bit of a relief on this. They get one extra year before each jump to make sure that their business can stand the increase.
Small being 25 employees and fewer.
Right, 25 and fewer. The California, a week ago, it was looking like California would be in the lead on this. New York, as you mentioned, yesterday the legislature announced a similar minimum wage increase there. And really, in the context of the United States, so many cities in California, cities across the country and states are looking at raising the minimum wage. I mean, it's the political season. Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side has called for increases.
Hillary Clinton applauded this too, and
Hillary
California
Clinton
did.
has, and you know, there's a level of anger in the country about how wages have stagnated since the Great Recession. So California is not out there so much anymore.
Now, what were the concerns the governor had? He was a Democrat, though, and progressive, seen as a progressive, but he was dragging his feet on this.
Well, he was worried, just like any employer would be worried. He was going to have to pay the lowest paid California state employees more money. I think the figure was $4 billion. But I think
so he's thinking, where are we going to come up with this in a few years?
the economy is getting better, and I think he was facing also the probable certainty that voters would approve a minimum wage increase. Throughout the country, wherever this has been on the ballot, it's been approved.
Right. So it was going to happen. Let's get ahead of it, Roger.
San Diego City has its own increase on the ballot for June, right?
And Todd Gloria, who is the person behind it, has vowed to fight for it. It is a little bit more aggressive. It would move to $10.50 almost immediately, and then $11 in January 2017, so a year before the state law. But that would simply put San Diego in the same category as San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Jose. So we wouldn't be competing with other big, innovative cities. We'd just be a little bit ahead of the statewide.
All right,
But
well,
also,
go ahead,
there's a sick day component as well
Yes.
to that measure. 5 sick days that are required.
versus 3 in the state.
Versus 3.
Which is very important for low-wage workers, for whom, if you take a day off, that may be, you may not be able to pay your rent. You may not be able to
The
buy
city of
food.
San Diego will be an island in the county, and other cities around it would not have that.
I don't think 50 cents is going to be a big enough a big enough amount of money to make.
But that is what the critics are saying,
Yeah,
Roger.
right.
Well, as long as we're talking about the city council hearings and this whole local discussion here, we do have a bite here. This is from some testimony at City Hall, Josefina Garcia, about what a minimum wage hike can mean to a worker.
More than once, I came to work sick because I could not afford to miss a day of work. I couldn't lose all that income. I had to pay rent and my schooling. If I would have had access to sick days, I would not have had the necessity to come to work, putting at risk not only my coworkers, but all those customers who came into it.
All right. So who are we going to benefit? Who is going to benefit mostly in California from this hike?
Well, it's going to be two groups. It's going to be entry-level college graduates who are starting out on their first job, and it might just be minimum wage, high school graduates, and also those who have been in this situation at the lower end of the economic ranks for a long period of time. Like the person that you heard, someone who's got a family, they're trying to feed them, they're trying to pay rent, and the current $10 doesn't really cover it. You've got to get some money from elsewhere. So I think it's going to help a lot of people. The argument on the other side, Patricia Bates, state senator who represents North County, said it very clearly that she thinks many employers will think twice before they hire more people. But, we're in the midst of a demographic change here in the United States. There are fewer and fewer young workers. There's less and less, fewer and fewer illegal immigrants, despite the campaign rhetoric out there. And there are more and more retirees. So I think employers are going to find they're going to have to pay more anyway. So it may help these workers without having a big impact.
But isn't there a concern that they're going to move to automation? So instead of giving your
invest in automation. So
check
over
in the box, you'll just make it, mark it on a tablet rather than telling somebody what
over
you
time,
want.
it's cheaper than paying out of wages and benefits over time.
That's probably definitely going to happen. In fact,
Has happened for
it has.
decades.
Yeah, in the Central Valley, they're experimenting with machines for picking farm products.
Mechanized harvest.
You could take a long-term view and say, it's probably better, particularly as the demographics are changing, that the really menial jobs get automated in some way, so that when there is an open job, it's for something a little bit higher than just flipping a burger.
Now, Republicans didn't support this in Sacramento. Of course, Democrats have a supermajority, didn't need Republican votes. In fact, a couple of Democrats sided against it. And some of these folks were from rural areas, as you say, where they say the coastal cities, this may not even help much in San Francisco or San Diego where it's expensive, but in other rural parts, Central Valley, this is a lot of money to be paying for wages where it's not so expensive to live.
It's going to raise our costs as consumers for farm products. That's going to happen. It's probably going to make, interestingly, some of the immigration less attractive because that's been something that's been drawing people. California is in a unique situation. We've got so many innovative industries that are already paying a lot of money. So if anything, it's going to bring up the lower end of the economic spectrum without having a big impact on employers.
Let's talk about, just for a moment, the federal wage, the minimum wage federally. It's half of what we're talking about.
It's $7 and something.
25 cents.
$7.25. But I don't think you're going to see a lot of companies moving from, say, California to South Dakota to save. California doesn't have that kind of industry. It may be true elsewhere in the country, but not here. Certainly not in coastal California.
All right. A few seconds left on this. You think this campaign will pass in the city as we move into the election here in this
well, with the June primary and all this smoke and craziness in the presidential should draw more people into it. And I don't know if they will know that the state number is going up.
And a big factor in the national campaign, a couple of seconds left.
Well, I would just actually add to what Roger had said, that actually the opposition to the minimum wage campaign locally has really fallen. There's not really a lot of interest in it. And then you have Todd Gloria and folks in his camp that are going to be really pushing the importance of this.
So we'll see. We'll see how that all plays out. We have run out of time, but we'll get to it in another show, I'm sure. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Roger Sholey of the San Diego Union Tribune, Lisa Halverstad of Voice of San Diego, and Chris Genuine of the Times of San Diego. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.